Hello everyone, I am Alex Subik, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Vice President at RMIT University. I will be hosting today's event, the Digital Forum, RMIT Next Digital Forum, as part of our broader consultation feeding into the RMIT Next Strategy 2025. It's going to be, I think, a very engaging and hopefully a very enjoyable forum for all. We've basically posed one question at the outset of this forum, and that's how can a leading sector, dual sector, tertiary institution like RMIT strengthen our role as a digital thought leader and innovator, engage with industry, business, and community. The context for this forum is the RMIT Next Strategy 2025, the new strategy which aims to focus in particular on our next chapter of evolution, engage with industry, business, community, to play a major role in shaping the world around us through our graduates, through our research, and through a myriad of other programs, activities, and products and services that we, as a dual sector university, are engaged in. The RMIT Next forums have been conducted throughout the year around some of the key themes that are of strategic importance to this institution, and digital and technology is one of those themes that we are focusing on today. Digital is at the heart of RMIT strategy, and it's not a surprise that this is one of those major themes that we wish to engage our broader community in a conversation. We have a number of guests today, but before we progress with the forum, I would like to ask my colleague Kay Latham to give acknowledgement of country. Over to you, Kay.
Thank you, Alex. So, as the sun set on yesterday evening, NAIDOC Week 2020, a week-long celebration of the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, drew to a close. This year's theme, always was, always will be, recognised that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. It spoke to their deep, lasting spiritual and cultural connection to country and their legacy as Australia's first explorers, navigators, engineers, farmers, botanists, scientists, diplomats, astronomers and artists. The list goes on. Australia has the world's oldest oral stories. The first peoples engraved the world's first maps, created the earliest paintings of ceremony, and invented unique technologies. Their adaptation and intimate knowledge of country enabled them to endure climate change, catastrophic droughts, and rising sea levels. Through ingenious land management systems like fire stick farming, they transformed the harshest habitable continent into a land of bounty. NAIDOC Week 2020 acknowledged and celebrated that our nation's story did not begin with documented European contact, whether in 1770 or 1606, with the arrival of the Dutch on the western coast of the Cape York Peninsula, but that the very first footprints on this continent were those belonging to the First Nations peoples. And Australia's history, in fact, began at the dawn of time and dates back thousands of generations. Let us embrace the true history of this country, acknowledge Australia's true sovereignty, and celebrate that we have one of the oldest continuing cultures on the planet. Always was, always will be. I acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I respectfully acknowledge the ancestors and elders past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business and where indeed you may be dialing in from today. Noon Gudgeon, thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for this wonderful acknowledgement of country and for setting the scene for us to hold this forum. what does digital transformation mean for RMIT in a post-COVID environment? It is a topic that no doubt many institutions are currently considering, but for us, it is at the heart of the 2025 strategy. Today's members colleagues who will be contributing to this discussion and who will be setting the scene for further conversation include Ian Rouse, the Director and Country Leader for Amazon Web Services for Australia and New Zealand. Amazon Web Services, a strategic partner of RMIT. Helen Souness, Chief Executive Officer of RMIT Online, our own trailblazer in our online education and outreach to industry and business driving workforce transformation. Keith Ritchie, the Head of Community Affairs at Siemens for Australia and New Zealand, another strategic partner of RMIT, partner that we have worked over the last couple of months to launch the Digital Workforce Transformation Innovation Hub in the Advanced Manufacturing Precinct. Claire Mason, the Principal Research Scientist at CSIRO Data 61 and a colleague from the National Digital Skills Expert Panel, currently developing a strategy for digital skills for the next chapter of this country. Jed Horner, the Strategy Advocacy Manager at Standards Australia, who has recently led and co-wrote the first ever AI standard, not just for Australia, but a standard that will set a benchmark for international standards organization dissemination. As you can see, our panel is broad, is diverse, because this topic is very diverse. It touches every discipline, every sector, every domain of our operations, every type of institutions within a digital economy and within our country that's currently undergoing wholesale digital transformation. But before we move on to our topics of discussion, I might just reflect on a few points that we have experienced during COVID-19 period this year and which are setting the scene for this discussion. We've all seen that COVID-19 pandemic has revealed during this year many aspects of digital transformation, perhaps more profoundly than any other disruption we have all experienced to date in our lifetimes. We have moved rapidly to remote working modes and remote learning. We have developed digital health and telehealth solutions, which are rapidly finding their way into mainstream Medicare services, unimaginable a few years ago. And we have deployed effectively digital manufacturing and digitally enabled supply chains and retail at a scale never imagined before. With digitalization, the cycles of technological advances and innovation are now measured in months rather than decades. The industrial revolution that we have all embarked on, even pre-COVID, and COVID has accelerated that, don't discriminate. They impact every sector and all parts of our society. The exponential technological change is redefining the nature of work, with many jobs changing or becoming obsolete. Automation is removing repetitive and potentially unsafe or even hazardous work, while freeing up humans to engage in more creative and value-added tasks. There is a promise of growth in economy and jobs that we have seen with all the other industrial revolutions. But as opposed to previous experiences, we want to ensure that we bring the society along and that there's no part of society left behind. So therefore, this is not just a technological issue, it is a social issue, it is about people. The dynamic nature of technological advancements demands innovation of organizations in order to adapt to the changes we're all experiencing. It has never been more important to collaborate, and we all must contribute to creating a more inclusive and interconnected ecosystem involving all actors, including university, indeed a dual sector leading global universities such as RMIT, industry, business, government, society, community. This will require fundamentally different strategies and fundamentally different approaches built on fundamentally different models of public and private sector partnerships. Today's forum aims to touch on some of those topics from different perspectives, from leaders from different walks of life, industry and business. Following the initial presentations or exchange of insights from our panel members, I will moderate a question and answer session, and I would encourage all of you to put your questions in the chat line, and I will field those questions and use those questions as a reference for my moderation. On this note, I would like to invite Ian Rouse to kick off the panel discussion. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to share some thoughts. If you think about the relationship between RMIT and Amazon Web Services, we use the word partnership and we mean it. And so be it Alex and I catching up and me sharing some more aspirational ideas, or be it Alex letting me know where we need to improve our business, which we do because we make mistakes just like everybody. This is an organisational partnership where we share rich ideas and we're vocal. And I think they're the right foundations for success. If I think about where we are today, we have a number of RMIT online courses based around our technology, and we have our Cloud Innovation Centre with a specific focus on cyber, improving the skills around cyber and improving our capability. And with that now intersecting to industry capability and redefinitions of critical infrastructure, there is no doubt in my mind that Cloud Innovation Centre is going to be super critical for us over the years to come. And we accept the challenges from community in order to improve ourselves and improve our capability. Thanks to the team for the acknowledgement in the country. That was one of the, I guess, best seen settings we've had for some time, and certainly I've experienced for some time. And just a shout out to say thank you for that. And I'll just +1 on that. When we think about our role in society, we think long term. And so we're an organisation that tends to be very humble, and we're misunderstood. In fact, we have an internal saying, we're prepared to be misunderstood for long periods of time. We actually think really deeply about energy. We think deeply about sustainability, and we've made massive investments in New South Wales and continue to make massive investments around Australia in making sure we have renewable energy to offset our data centre operations, and in fact have made a number of climate pledges. And so we think about long term. In fact, internally in Amazon, we think about building a business that'll outlast all of us and provide positive return. When my team members get up and think about the business, I ask for 2 things and 2 things alone. Thing number 1 I ask for is to pave the way for disruptive innovation. And the second thing I ask them to think about is how do we make this world a better place? And it's at that intersection, if it's okay, Alex, I want to share some opening thoughts just to stimulate debate, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions as we go through. If I think about the last 6 to 12 months, I'll give you 3 things that I've learned about the public cloud. The first thing I've learned is it's disproportionately been about speed and agility. The second thing I've learned is that the public cloud has been about access to the latest technology. And the third thing I've learned about is massive scale. And I'll just quickly share a story about that, and then I'll come to the interface, if that's okay. When I think about helping state government and federal government respond, we worked in partnership with them, be it COVID safe, pathology results to reduce negative test anxiety, improving social distancing by making sure you can journey plan and pick different carriages where there are low capacity in those carriages. All of these things have interfaced to citizens. And I think a lot about our obligations around community. And I think about the last 6 to 12 months being specifically about citizens and customers, and how the fact that every single thing we're trying to do to keep people safe, reduce anxiety, or actually just have a phone that can be answered in a short period of time is all about community interactions and making sure we can keep each other safe. And so I think a lot about our role and the customers' roles in actually designing those things. Through that process, it's been hard to find the right people. It's been very, very difficult to find the right people per state. And if we think about resilience, I think that each state will start to think about their own resilience, their own economic resilience, their own resilience around cyber, and whether they have enough skills in the state to function when the chips are really down. And I think there'll be lots of self-inspection around those processes, and we think about state government. If I come to the intersection with RMIT, I think about 3 things, and I'm going to be completely bold here. There will be lots of, but that couldn't work here. I accept that. But there are 3 ideas I've got which are aspirational ideas for the university as a partner, Alex. And the first thing I think about is allowing us to rebalance away from non-physical skills. If I think about my long-term goal, I'd love to together end up at a position where digital skills are seen as important as a hairdressing apprenticeship. Now, I've not no problem with hairdressers or physical skills, but I think we're unbalanced. And I think that we're balanced heavily towards physical demonstrable skills as opposed to demonstrable digital skills. And I worry about that as far as our future workforce is concerned. So the first piece about is physical to non-physical skills around digital transformation. The second thing I think about is actually quite contentiously on purpose, students as customers. And if I was looking at RMIT with your massive customer base of learned colleagues being produced at a high quality level every year, I think about how do I create sticky, repeatable relationships? I think about how do I have a guide? How do I actually allow someone to say, people like you who took this course could actually earn this much more and increase their productive capacity and their economic output as a result and pay more tax, and so the flywheel goes. And I wonder, without being too cute, whether we need to go from lifelong learning to a world of lifelong learning and earning, and whether there's a role for us to play to help folks achieve their own goals in community as we educate them with skills. And the last piece I think about, Alex, is how as industry participants do we help think big? And for thinking big inside our business, we think about eliminating constraints. And if I think about eliminating constraints, if we're in a digital world and we can massively scale because the economics are different and you're relying upon other people to help you be successful, why wouldn't RMIT think about having 1 million students per year by 2025? What are the fundamental constraints that have to be eliminated in order to help RMIT chart a very different vision and a very different learning outcome, and a very different, I guess, incubation role into the society and community? And so I'll just share those three initial thoughts, Alex, and throw to you in the panel for, I'm sure, strong Q&A as we get through.
Thank you so much, Ian, on your reflection. Great way to start the panel discussions. We might now move to Helen Saunders, the CEO of RMIT Online, and I understand Christine will share your slides. Helen?
Thank you, Christina. And thank you for including me in this panel. I thought for my just introductory remarks, a number of you won't have worked a lot with us, so I wanted to just share a little bit of context of what RMIT Online is doing and how we are thinking about industry partnerships embedded in our learning experiences, and also to end with a few questions that are the bogeyman in my thinking around the next 5 years and industry partners. So as a provocation, perhaps like Ian, to start the thinking and the discussion. So just very briefly, our mission from the first day, we are on a mission to build a community of lifelong learners successfully navigating the world of work. So we very consciously chose a couple of those words, lifelong learners, because we think, you know, gone are the days, as Martin says, our cohort is now 16. And I'm very proud to say we've had a number of 70-year-olds taking coding courses with us in our short course portfolio. That lifelong learning, we need to update our skills constantly through our careers. We are not graduates and done, or even postgraduates and done. In fact, in that short course non-accredited portfolio, about have a bachelor's and over 40% have postgraduate qualifications already. So clearly we are attracting the lifelong learner, and these people see value in constantly upgrading their skills. If we go to the next slide, just to give you a flavour for the portfolio we are building, and that is been rapid development, fundamentally informed by our industry partners to address the future of work skill gaps. It is this tragedy, I know you will share my concern, that we have 1 million unemployed in this country right now and hundreds of thousands of vacancies in future of work areas such as digital transformation, as Ian's been saying, and tech skills. All of our industry partners are working with us to a huge degree because of gaps of skills in their ecosystems holding their businesses back. So you see a number of accredited courses that move into future of work roles like product management and customer success. And in our future skills portfolio, we have actually developed those courses with our industry partners. So if we go to the next slide, I won't dwell too long, but just giving you a flavour for how we work with industry in these portfolios. And that is, to start with, we actually we consult with industry to actually develop our products. So to think what should be on the roadmap. We, of course, look at the market data around skills gaps and mismatches between applicants and jobs available, and that gives you a baseline. But when we actually shape those products, even the accredited portfolio, I think a great example is that data science leadership course, which is now one of the stars of the portfolio. It's having incredible success with students, and that one was core. We need data scientists. Obviously, it's a top 5 LinkedIn job shortage, etc. We knew we needed data scientists, but when we talked to industry more deeply, we also learned that if we go to the next slide, actually, that's a flavour of the industry partners we're working with. When we talked to industry in more depth around the data scientists they needed, it wasn't just technical skills. Increasingly, data science is informing company strategy, and a data scientist, to be truly effective in the role, needed to have strategic and leadership skills as well. Hence, the Masters of Data Science Leadership was born, and has been really filling a gap of the people who can translate both the technical data insights, but also be able to influence the business to act on those data insights and drive strategy. So it's in the roadmap, that first area that we embed industry. It's in co-created content. Now, obviously, that varies between the accredited and the non-accredited. We build in partnership with schools in the accredited portfolio, but in the non-accredited credential portfolio, we actually co-create and actually build the courses, usually with an industry partner and subject matter experts. And then in the short courses portfolio, again, they're actually mentored by industry people, and that just really ensures the absolute latest thinking in these skills. These industry mentors are actually helping our students week by week. It's formative assessment right through to a final assessment, which is a strategy, for example, on blockchain or developing your mobile app. And the industry mentors who are working every day in these fields are mentoring the students through that very applied skill acquisition. And then finally, in thought leadership, and this is where we try to really pay back to our industry partners, where we go out to market together and help, I guess, the rallying cry for upskilling through careers, because we're still seeing so many people not upskilling despite the lack of jobs in perhaps their current field. So that is the thought leadership piece, the media impression. So just to give you a really quick example, I was going to choose this, Ian, before you were on the panel, which is AWS, just the many ways we're working together right across the university. Obviously, Alex leading in that partnership, and I think the kick is just one of the absolute highlights and such an example of what industry can be to RMIT. Those kick experiences working between industry, AWS gurus as industry mentors in the programs, solving real world problems, learning all the collaboration and soft skills as well as the technical skills of cybersecurity. It's incredibly exciting. We've also done world first courses with AWS and are incredibly grateful to have also been able to go to market with those courses, including a recent grad cert in digital health, where AWS's experience in cloud-based digital applications in the health industry was incredibly valuable to shaping that new program. So it's in a number of areas, and that just gives you a flavour for how we're working. To end with some provocations, so you can skip on, Christina, to the last slide. I guess if you were to think in our last 5-year strategy, maybe the bogeyman risk of our strategy was international students stopped coming. I think in industry, we have some of our greatest opportunities in our next 5 years, but also some risks. And I thought I'd just share those as provocations to the discussion to end now, Alex. In a world where some tech giants, obviously we have amazing tech companies collaborating with us like AWS, but I think you know who I'm talking about. Google has gone to market and said, we've lost patience with the universities of the world to prepare our future workforce. We're doing a Google degree. You don't need to go to college, guys. Come to us for a year and you'll have a job at Google. What is our role in that world, and what is the threat of that disruption? Another one that worries me is what is our role to play? And don't get me wrong, I think we have a massive role to play with academic integrity and the incredibly robust peer review system and so on to contribute to IP. But let's be realistic. AWS just announced it spent in the last year on R&D $40 billion to September this year. That is increasing every year. That was a 20% increase on last year. That is more than Australian business and government combined spend on R&D in Australia. What is our role in the world where our industry partners may be spending? I mean, I know AWS a couple of years ago had 5,000 engineers working on voice technology. What's our role in the R&D and teaching of voice technology when there is that kind of capability in some of our industry partners? And finally, as learning content and is increasingly available free, what is our role? Now, I think there's a hugely strong answer in our learning and teaching knowledge and expertise. And I'm incredibly proud of that expertise online in my team and also in the university. But it is a challenge when content can be free, and some people will look at MOOCs and say, I can get it for free. What's our difference? So I think those were my provocations, Alex. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Helen, and always a pleasure listening to you. And I've been just reading also the chat line. I've been busily writing down some of the comments, as there's additional provocations in the chat line as well that are really driving some innovative thinking. But before we move on to questions later on, I'll hand over to Keith Ritchie from Siemens. Keith, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I wanted to open with something that I talk to my employees about. And I would say this to anyone. I say that to my kids. I say it to my colleagues, my friends. Everything that can be automated and digitalized will be. It's as simple as that. And that means a constant adaptation and learning for your entire career. There's no such thing as a degree that lasts forever. It means students today should be actually learning how to harness that technology, regardless of their course. So, and also work on how they can create or even at least fit into entirely new business models. And apart from domain knowledge, they also need other key foundation skills. I'm not sure and I'm not confident that universities are there yet with this. If you don't do this, you're actually at risk of being redundant before you even begin your career. That's what I would say. Next slide, please. Okay, so we spend some money also on R&D. So we spend about $9 billion a year, and these are the areas. So Alex, you asked to see some of the trends. What are the trends of digitalization? And I guess this is an indication for us where we see the future is where we invest in our R&D. So additive manufacturing, autonomous robots, blockchain, so on and so forth, cybersecurity, future of automation, simulation and digital twin. They're all topics that you'd be very familiar with. In terms of how important it is to us, we put out about nearly 7,000 inventions a year, and we're the leading patent applicant in Europe. Next slide, please. So a subject that talks about the trends, really about what's happening right now, is we are transitioning into a fourth industrial revolution. The Germans came up with that concept. Some years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, the German government put the leaders of German manufacturing mainly, into a room and said, we need you to tell us what's actually happening, because from a GDP point of view, manufacturing alone is worth something like 27, 28%. And we know the world's changing. So what's happening and what do we need to do to prepare for this? And Siemens was in that room and ended up actually chairing the initial foundation, which is the Platform Industry 4.0 group, the official group in Germany. The fourth industrial revolution is essentially you've got automation and digitalization really changing the way the world works. And I haven't got enough time to talk to you in depth on the theory, so I just want to talk to you with some practical examples there. But Industry 4.0, you're talking about digital twins, AI, you've got the concept of batch of one, industrial Internet of Things. These are all technologies that relate to the fourth industrial revolution. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll share with you some local examples, just a couple, so that you can actually see in context what that means. So Dulux is a great local example in Victoria. The most advanced paint manufacturing facility in the world is now Dulux in Victoria. They are fully paperless manufacturing. They've removed 75,000 manual steps per year. They're capable of producing batches of paint 1/50th of the size of what they were previously capable of doing, and in 1/8 of the time. And this is incredibly important when you look at the ability to be flexible to market, responding to market, keeping risk low. At least 30% of their workforce at that facility, and it might even be higher now, are females. If you go into their other facility, which is more old-fashioned up in Queensland, it's a facility of old-fashioned burly blokes who carry heavy bags and shovels and stuff. It's completely different. This facility requires a completely new set of skills as well from the workers. And they call it a black suit plant, which means that you can walk through that facility in a black suit and not get a drop of paint on you. You cannot do that in other paint factories. And, you know, I was there when this photo was taken. This is real. Most of the operators are using tablets or computer screens. And that's how it works. They don't touch anything. Next slide, please. And by the way, that was showcased. Alex was on a delegation where that was showcased at Hanover Fair, which is the world's largest industrial trade fair in Germany each year. And Dulux was front and center on the Siemens stand, which also is the largest stand at that fair. This is one that we've just launched in the last 2 weeks, this case study and reference. Wolf for the Willows is a microbrewery. The reason it's a great example is because most of Australia's manufacturing are very small. So you think that Industry 4.0, the big players are going to get ahead because they've got millions of dollars to invest. But there are solutions at all scales. And these guys had a particular challenge during COVID, and that was that they made kegs. So the majority of their focus was kegs, not cans. And overnight, the bottom fell out of that market because all of the pubs and restaurants and wine bars and so on were closed down, and they're still not open properly. So they had to quickly move to cans. So they went from 80% kegs to 80% cans overnight, and they were able to do that through flexible technology that they've invested in. They've also reduced their standard brewing time from 25 to 18 days. I mean, these are critical things that come about through digitalization and automation. And they wouldn't be here today if they weren't doing this. The next slide, please. By the way, there's dozens more examples like that. I'm happy to talk about other examples at any other time because we've got some fantastic examples out of Australia. So the question is, what have we been doing about this and trying to address the trend? And Alex has been heavily involved in this with us for many years. So he's been a founding partner with us on a lot of these topics. And he currently leads and chairs the Industry 4.0 test labs. So we set up a working group in Australia called the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 Task Force. It replicated Germany's version of that, which is the Platform Industry 4.0 group, and we replicated and mirrored the work streams as well. And Alex actually chairs a combined work stream of the future of work as well as the test laboratories. And the idea there is, what do we need to do for students in the future of work? And then what do we need to do for companies that need to transition? And that's what the test laboratories are all about. We've got a national network of universities. We've got software grants so that they're using the same type of industrial software that our key customers use. And we also are opening test labs across the country. There was one opened in Queensland just in the last month. So this is a fantastic initiative that Alex is also heavily involved in. Next slide, please. The good news is that RMIT is part of it, so I think that's means that you're on the right track. We signed an MOU with Festo and RMIT back in June, and that is about a digital innovation hub, which is a global Australasian hub. That includes a high-tech software grant. So early in the piece, when I talked about harnessing the technology and having those skills, those digital skills, regardless of what type of foundation undergraduate or what sort of course you've got, this grant included Mendix low-code software. So that what's really important there is that that's the first in the world from a Siemens grant point of view to include that. So anyone can use software to enhance or improve whatever their area of expertise, their domain knowledge is. So that's really important. And just to sum up in the last part, I guess, Alex, you wanted to have a couple of more controversial things. And I would say that my question is, do we need less undergraduate degrees and more of a focus on micro-credentialing so that we can really quickly get people into the workforce with what they need and then keep building on them forever? I would also say that some of the key skills that are probably really important are missing. So having a business understanding, a broad business understanding, having lateral thinking and problem solving, being cross-disciplinary, being creative, having co-collaboration skills, having a strategic nature. They're the sorts of things that almost all degrees will need to have in the future, I think, or all qualifications. And then the question is, from a university point of view, who's your competition? So if we've just run a year of online, essentially in Australia, who's your competition now? Because it's not traditional anymore. It's not where you were 12 months ago. That's probably all I've got, and I've taken up too much time, but I hope that makes sense, Alex.
Thank you so much, Keith. And I think it was good to hear from you a different perspective, a perspective from a broader manufacturing sector, having in mind that that sector employs around 1 million people in Australia, and that it, unlike most other sectors, it is a sector that creates the highest value out of every dollar created in manufacturing, where there's another $2 created downstream in services and products. It is also kind of on the back of the recent, I think a few weeks ago, launch by Minister Karen Andrews of the new modern manufacturing strategy for Australia, where the government will be investing billions into this sector, because Australia has been a manufacturing country and it will stay a manufacturing country, but in a different kind of a digital economy that's driven by industrial digitalization. I will leave it at that, Keith, and we'll come back to some other questions later. I will now hand over to Claire Mason from CSIRO Data 61 to continue.
Thank you, Alex. And I want to talk about digital transformation and education from two different perspectives, because I think educators are dealing with digital transformation on two fronts. One is that it's changing because there's a different set of skills required to work in the future. And it's also changing how you deliver education and learning, because you too are using digital technology to improve the way in which you deliver education and learning. So first, I'm going to start with what we have been learning through our research about the way in which demand for skills is changing in this more technologically enabled environment. One of the first slides, if we could go on to the next slide now, Christina, this just models impacts of automation for the largest 15 occupations in the Australian labour market. It's a bit of a complex graph. The dots show how big that occupation is. And so the very largest occupation in the Australian workforce are sales assistants. And the bar is that there's approximately 80% automation risk for this occupation. That is, there's a lot that you can automate out of a sales assistant role if it's a basic one, because you've got online shopping, you've got increasingly sophisticated vending machines, and you have self-service checkouts. But in the next largest occupation in the Australian labour market, which is school teachers, and the one after that is midwifery and nursing professionals, there's a very low proportion of automation risk. That is, we will not be doing away with human educators and nurses in the near future. So the impacts on jobs per se, in terms of being taken away and workers needing to reskill for a totally new occupation, are highly variable. But even for the teachers and the nurses, there will be a lot of change in what skills you need to keep staying employable in your role. And what I mean by that is that the skills required in occupations are shifting over time. What we've done is we've used data collected by the US Labor Bureau of Labor Force to understand what skills are needed in US occupations. They have HR managers, skills needed in each of the occupations they manage. We've mapped that back to Australian occupations, and we've classified those skills into 3 types: communication skills, technical skills, and STEM skills: science, technology, engineering, and maths. On my next slide, what you can see is how demand for these 3 different types of skills have been changing over time. All of them have increased because our labour market is increasing in size, but the technical skills are increasing least of all. The STEM skills are the next of growth. STEM skills. Increasing educational personal skills. So my big message is digital transformation does not just require digital skills. Above all, it actually requires those interpersonal or non-routine cognitive skills. And that's because 2 things. One, most of us work in the services sector, and delivering services does require interpersonal skills. But 2, it's because the thing that is hardest to automate are the essentially human things, like someone feel understood, to define a complex problem, to empathize. So the more that we automate work, the more that the bit that's left over for the human is the interpersonal work. So if we look at the next slide, the important thing here is that even within each of these skills groups, the composition or the importance of these skills is changing over time. So here again, you can see how much variability there is in the types of skills that are needed in the workforce over the last 5 or so years. So far less demand for writing skills, a lot more demand for things like negotiation and service orientation skills. If we go to the next slide, you can see with the STEM skills as well, it's a very mixed picture. And the most traditional STEM skills, things like science and programming, are not showing much growth over time. And it's what we consider more generic STEM skills, things like being able to use a computer, working with numbers, that are actually showing the high rate of growth. And whilst this is retrospective data, another thing we've been doing, if we can move to the next slide, is mining online job ads to see what types of skills are being mentioned by employers as needed in a given role. What I'm showing you here over time is the mentions of interpersonal skills in Australian job ads for each of the different occupations. And the key thing to take away from this graph is these lines are all increasing over time. So I have a different line for different cities. You can see there's hardly any variability across the cities. So the increased demand for interpersonal skills is highly consistent across cities, and it's highly consistent across occupations. But if you go to the next slide, the same thing, digital skills, and you can see here it's less consistent. Yes, we do need more digital skills, but that effect is perhaps strongest for technicians and trades workers. And we look at the professionals, and there's a lot of variability in the level of digital skills required in Sydney and Melbourne, where it's very high, compared to, say, Brisbane and the rest of New South Wales. So the digital skills are important, but less consistently so. The other thing I'd like to talk about, and I think we're moving on to the next slide here, is what all this means for the delivery of education and training. And to answer this question, we did some very intensive interviews with a range of stakeholders across the educational ecosystem. So government, technology providers, educators and students. And we asked them what digital transformation meant for the delivery of education and training. And they all said that digital channels were going to be increasingly important as we go forward, in part because of students' expectations. Students are high users of technology, but also because technology is being increasingly used in the work environment. So for the learning environment to be relevant, we have to be using that technology there as well. The fact is that when it's used well, we can actually get better learning outcomes from digital technology because it can create a deeper and more engaging learning experience. And the other big benefit is that when you're working with digital content, the marginal cost for delivering training to another student is very low. But when we looked across all the opportunities for the use of digital technology, the thing that all stakeholders saw as the top opportunity was using data generated by digitization to improve resource allocation decisions. So for educators, this might be data on how students are progressing in their learning to understand what they need to focus on more, or when they need to provide someone with one-on-one support. For students, it might be understanding which course is best able to fit them for the career of their dreams. For government, it might be about gaining insight into where training needs are growing fastest and where to invest funding. For employers, it might be being able to use a platform to find the educator who's delivering the right content in the right format for their needs. But my last slide is where they talked the most, and that was about the fact that you would not be doing away with the need for human-led and face-to-face education and training. And they talked about reasons for this in terms of quality, relevance, efficiency, convenience, and inclusion. All of these things require some degree of human-led and face-to-face training. The top issue is when you're dealing with practical skills or you're teaching interpersonal skills, which if you recall are the most important skill set in our economy today, you need face-to-face and in-person training. You need that for the practical skills so you can get the sensory feedback on things, smell and how they feel and what it sounds like when you're trying to adjust a piece of equipment. But for interpersonal, you cannot learn those skills without being in contact with a human educator and other students. And I won't go into all of these in detail, but I think in the era of COVID-19, a comment from one of the international students was perhaps most interesting, because he said, look, if you delivered all your training online, why would I bother doing my training in your country? Because I come here and do my training in Australia because I want to understand the culture and experience it that way. And I think that is a big part of what we learn from face-to-face training is how we do things around here and what is the right way to behave in my profession and in my workplace. So I guess I conclude by saying, yes, digital is going to be vital, both in terms of what you teach and how you teach, but that human-led and interpersonal skill set will be absolutely precious to maintain your advantage and quality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clay, and thank you for clear based on evidence that digital transformation does not require only digital skills, but also, if you want to call them soft skills, in a simpler way. But that also correlates well with the research that has come out of RMIT and led by the team here involved with cybersecurity and Professor Esha Rao, who is currently director of the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute, driving that area, that discipline for Australia, confirming that industry, businesses involved in cybersecurity and associated digital technologies and processes need soft skills, not just digital skills. I think that's coming loud and clear from many stakeholders. We'll touch on that later on. Moving on to Jed Horner from Australian Standards. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And look, I've really been enjoying the commentary as we've gone along. So thank you all for diving in as well. It's given me plenty of food for thought. As Helen was talking as well about the collaboration that you have as an institution, it was actually really reassuring because when I looked through all of the names and the companies there, it's a similar picture. And so for people like Keith from Siemens, also Ian from AWS, and of course, Alex and the team from RMIT, you're all people we work with in the standards world, particularly in relation to digital and new and emerging standards in areas like space and AI, but also more broadly in some of those legacy areas of the economy which remain important. I wanted to be not controversial, but I suppose make a constructive contribution from the outset to take a view where we can zoom out, I suppose, and look at what the challenges are that we have. And the lens I've been looking at, some of what Australia faces in terms of macro trends as well. So I think I term it our translational opportunity, but it's equally our challenge. As a country, you all know we've had challenges in terms of commercialization. I would argue we've also had challenges in terms of drawing on our natural talent base. And if we want to talk about issues like diversity as well, that's a classic case. We all know the stories of migrants who come here with very advanced degrees and years of experience who also struggle to translate that. So when I talk about our translational opportunity, it's not just that commercial edge, but I'm also talking about how we actually draw on the talent pool we have as a country, which is a strong one. And so I had three key thoughts there that I wanted to leave everyone with, and people on the call have touched on these to various extents, and so I'll pick up on those points too. One is how we frame the opportunities. We've all seen a lot of talk, particularly from government in the current era, around sovereignty. Universities also sometimes get caught up in this rhetoric. What does that mean? Everyone has a different view. So at the moment, it's been driven from a security lens. But if you look at supply chain challenges, which we're all familiar with in the world of COVID, we've gone down this rabbit hole of talking about sovereignty in terms of cutting ourselves off from the world. When we actually should be talking about scale-ups, we should be talking about the opportunity that comes, as people spoke about earlier, including Ian, from building microservices using Amazon Web Services, which actually does give us a competitive advantage and is safe. So shifting that discussion, I think, is so important, and that can be done by thought leadership on the part of universities themselves, but it's also done by the doing. And acknowledging many people on the call here today demonstrate that too. So it's a question of how we actually spin out ideas from universities, and I think also through partnerships that we form, and some of those are on display here today. I think the other factor and a challenge for us as a country, when I think through how government does work, and I was really, really interested to read Tim Beaver's comments, I think they were bang on, is we've become addicted in our country, in Australia, to doing discrete digital projects. So we roll out digital driver's licenses and we pretend it'll change the world, and we actually lag other countries. So we lag the UK, we lag New Zealand, and in some respects, in some discrete areas, the US, although we could argue uptake is quite different in terms of that. So what I'm saying here is there's really an opportunity for us to do the sort of things you've been talking about on this chat here today. An example I can think of from New Zealand, who did this at scale by actually having national targets in terms of digital transformation and national investments, which actually opened up the space for collaborations between universities and government agencies too. So one of the examples you were talking about in terms of skills and mapping gaps was used. That logic was actually used to transfer and to translate some of the data science work into practical social transformation. So New Zealand abolished essentially its decile system for school funding, and they did that through advanced data analytics. So advanced data analytics to the point where they went to schools and they reallocated funding based on actual student need and not the old assumptions we had from people who fit into different social brackets, which affects our society to date. So I think there's an opportunity there to think macro, to push government, including from within the university, and for corporate partners as well, to talk about how we can tackle, I think, quite sticky social issues, complex ones certainly, through a more sort of programmatic lens. So less tinkering around the edges and doing individual projects to actually embracing a more transformative agenda. As I said, it's been done elsewhere. We have templates and we can do it at scale. Finally, I think the last point is around that thing we've all been talking about this afternoon, which for those of us have those tertiary degrees and some of us who've worked to get PhDs, it's still the case that some of those stackable credentials, if I use some US terminology, are very much in vogue now. And myself and others have taken advantage of that and continue to. And that's about accessing a form of learning which is much more agile and might be completely digital. It's on the job. It might also cross borders. So when we think about RMIT's footprint, clearly that's something that appeals. And Claire mentioned something which makes complete sense around the draw card, the aspiration for people to be in country for their cultural and educational experience. The other argument, particularly in our current environment, is that people might want to upskill. And it's not just about the particular curriculum content, but it's also about the networks one creates. And so that's something I really think we need to think about, drawing on the lesson, and I think the outcomes of the trips to Germany I've been on as well, with which Keith mentioned before, the Siemens delegations that have been put together as part of the Prime Minister's Task Force on Industry 4.0. One of the challenges we actually have here in Australia, and it's a cultural one, which is also becomes a financial one and a barrier, is how do we actually get Australians and companies to invest in their own people? Sure, there are some fantastic performers, but we know we don't even touch sides when it comes to the investment that companies in Germany and you might argue in the US and elsewhere place in ongoing education in really dynamic ways. And so I think that's something we need to pay attention to as we move from that discussion around common base credentials to stackable qualifications and credentials too. The final piece I wanted to throw out there was to not forget that we're part of a life cycle and supply chain. So it's the key message around standards, and that's taking great ideas that happen within universities and happen in partnerships that you might form with the corporate sector as well, and looking at how they actually diffuse globally. So if I think about examples, and I've got a few of them on screen, shipping containers, a physical product, an idea that came from the United States, took off through standardization as well. And it's one of the reasons we've actually been able to trade in the way we have. It physically and economically made a difference to the way we do business. The same thing for the other example I have there around the London Tube and tap on and tap off. Might not seem awfully exciting, but if you're building any products around financial services, reg tech, paying attention to those standards and shaping them is so important, because that's actually what enables you to scale globally. And that's what we see with some of the standards coming out of ISO, which get picked up by SWIFT, by our major banks, and which actually enable cross-border trade. And in some cases, without them, we wouldn't be able to do business. It's also the case that if you talk to startups and scale-ups, if they're not thinking about some of these requirements, it's probably not a viable business idea going cross-border. So that's something to really. And the same is for cybersecurity. So RMIT is doing great work in this space. You're also doing fantastic work in areas like AI, where we've really lent in terms of AI standards to give Australians a seat globally at the table. And the message, I suppose, there is the same lessons we could learn from the UK, which took some of those learnings which happened through academic research, certainly through the commercial application, and also through regulatory change. And they formed global standards around cybersecurity, which have had a massive impact even in shaping our own regulatory landscape. So I wanted to leave you with that thought that it's not just around the training we give in the digital space or around our scale or ambitions, but I also think there's a role here to do really, truly interdisciplinary work and to also think where all of that work goes. So moving beyond our traditional mindset of publication for the sake of it, or partnerships with quite narrow ambitions, and maybe thinking if we took a life cycle approach and we're developing a service, a product, or a particular methodology, how might that look globally? And how can we actually use some of this infrastructure to make sure particular projects which are shining can shine even brighter? And I'll leave you on that note.
Thank you so much, Jed, and thank you for bringing to the table the issues of standards, regulations, policy, and transferability of not only technological standards, but also skills. Two things that come out of your discussion that I think I might use two examples to kind of support what you said, Jed. When European Union, via its members, surveyed industry sectors in EU to determine what are the biggest impediments to digital transformation across EU, two things came out. One, standards, second, skills. Same feedback comes from industry in US. Also, you've shown an example from a fintech sector, or you mentioned the issues, implications of digital transformation on finance. As of last week, I've seen data that as of last week in Singapore, the fintech sector now employs more staff than the banking sector. Interesting transformations shaping up in the world of work. This brings us to the end of the initial introductory remarks of our panel members. We've heard very diverse but all very important and pertinent points coming out of various perspectives. We've seen case studies from the education sector. We've seen case studies from professional services sector, from manufacturing industry. We've heard reflections about digital innovation and digital transformation with respect to digital enterprise or organizational enterprise, with respect to skills, with respect to technology, standards, and so on. I think that created a very good scene, a very comprehensive, multi-layered scene for further discussion. Before I ask panel members to perhaps comment on one question or one idea that came out of the chat line that had a lot of support, was that concept of university as a data platform with a business model based around an AI engine. I might ask Ian to maybe comment on that before I move on to one question that I have for all of the members of the panel. Ian, over to you.
No, thank you, Alex. And please, I don't think this is Ian's idea. I think it's a case of who's going to be first to do this. And I think that there's a lot of people thinking about I guess, this idea. And I'll put a name to it. Let's just call it working title, because we're amongst friends, Chatham House rules, surely. Let's call it precision learning. If the medical fraternity is concerned about patient welfare and believes that precision medicine is a way to target treatment for the betterment of that particular individual and not to have broad brush antibiotic resistance across the community, well, maybe we've got something to learn from that. And so I think precision learning is an important area. In a couple of areas, career pivot. So, over the next decade or so, we'll have a bunch of folks exiting from industry, and let's just look at defence as an example. They'll exit defence with a strong pension, but with another 25 years of effective learning life and effective economic productivity. And I worry about, how do those people pivot? How do they make sure the acquisition of new skills can be something important to them and drive forward around precision learning? The second thing around precision learning I'm going to offer to you, Alex, and then I'll throw back to you is at Amazon, across our 1.2 million employees, and no, I'm not kidding, we just crossed that threshold, we have a leadership principle called learn and be curious. Leaders are never done learning and always seek to improve themselves. They're curious about new possibilities and act to explore them. And if we share that openly, there is this extraordinary demand for our people to acquire new skills that is being met by internal short-staffed resources, as opposed to being outsourced and saying, hey, listen, who from our partner community can help us on this lifelong journey? And how can we actually have our needs more transparently explained to, say, partners like RMIT? And so I think there's an industry angle, but also an angle around the intersection of data from that precision learning perspective. Back to you.
Thanks, Ian. Unless any other panel member has any comments on this particular concept, if I don't see any takers, I might go to an open question to all of you, and it's something that I know many of our people are interested in, and this is part of when you do benchmarking and you have such conversations that you aim to use to inform a strategy of an organization. In your respective roles, all of you within your organizations, you have engaged with and observed how different universities operate, both in Australia and overseas, and how they respond to external challenges and opportunities associated with digital transformation. What does good look like? Can you explain? Can you give us some examples? Give us some examples from your observations, your experience. What does good look like? Who cares to start? Who would like to start?
I'm happy to start, Alex.
Ian, and then we'll go to Keith.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to break the trend, but I'll have a go. I'll provide 3 examples if that's okay, because I think my learning in this particular space is that each university has very specific needs which they're working back from. In the case of University of Newcastle, they wanted to reclaim assets to provide better economic productivity for the university. So they went to the cloud and adopted a digital campus experience because they wanted to demolish the data centre and build student accommodation. So there's a particular argument, I guess, where digital transformation is a top-line driver as well as a bottom-line driver, just as an example. The second example would be Curtin University, who are looking to outperform and are looking to radically transform that university over the course of 4 to 5 years. And that's a radical roadmap where they're trying to build real-time software to deliver improved campus experience, location-based services. Where are you right now? Would you like help to get to your next lecture? That sort of precision pinpoint advice for those that actually want to go to campus. And the third example would be the work we're doing with the University of New South Wales, which is fundamentally, this time last year, we were buying property and assets. What do we do this year? How has the economy changed, and why do we keep buying assets? And it's a fundamental rethink of what does the real campus experience look like? How do we help, if online learning is to continue with the mental health of students, what are the right points of intervention through that curriculum and through that learning journey? And this concept of intervention to improve the experience is, I guess, a constant theme across those 3 universities. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. And Keith, keep in mind that this doesn't have to be only about, of course, about partnerships or examples from universities. It's a broader sectorial question. So, any observations or experiences that you have, Keith, from your Siemens perspective that, you think show you what good looks like?
Yeah, look, I mean, as part of, as you know, Alex, as part of the Prime Minister's task force, we co-collaborated on course curriculum, on developing an entirely new concept around Industry 4.0, and Siemens took a punt. We didn't know what jobs that would produce. We didn't know, we didn't have jobs for those people, and we didn't have any government support really for that. So we just invested in it and took a leap of faith, developed course curriculum that mixed skills, that mixed experiential learning, which I think is critical. I think online learning is really important, but to me, it's a bit like the old song, "Video killed the radio star." It doesn't mean that other learning dies. It just means it's another channel. It's like when someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, Keith, we've got the internet now. We don't need some other communications channel." No, we have an extra channel, and we need a multi-channel approach. And it's the same here. I think the best learning occurs through experience. I think very close cooperation with industry, because as you know, by the time a textbook and a curriculum is produced, it's probably already out of date based on the pace of change. So if you're not connected at the hip with industry and moving forward together, you're probably a little bit out of date. So I think that universities that are really closely connected, if I think back even to, it was a very long time ago when I did an undergraduate degree, but over 30 years ago, the best lecturers I had were out of industry, I thought. And the best learnings that I did were when we went and did field experiences and things like that. I just, it made such a huge difference. And, there's definitely a role for online, but there's definitely a role for more. We've got apprentices. I give two examples of work that's been done there. One is a young lady who dropped out of school early. She fell pregnant to a guy who was a bit of a dirtbag, and she needed to work, get money, and she became a beauty therapist just to get money, but it wasn't her ideal future. And when she saw our ad for the apprentices, where she was going to get paid to come and learn, she put up her hand and we employed her, and we took her on. Well, Alex, you were in the room in Berlin when she presented the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull. She presented him with something that she had created, which was a safety, something that she'd solved as a safety problem in the energy industry globally. So, she solved that herself through the apprenticeship. We've got another one now, Rex Chen, who you probably know as well. He's produced an app on MindSphere that's now it's being used by over 50 companies around the world in probably all the major continents that we have. This is someone who's just finished an apprenticeship. So that sort of learning is critical to me. I think that you can't beat that connection with industry. If I look at I have student interns working for me as well. And I know the feedback I get from them is that they get invaluable learning because it's quite different to what the courses might be teaching them. This is real. This is what they have to do. Tomorrow I want you to write an email to the CEO asking for something. You're not taught that at university. I need you to go and talk to an engineer down on level 2 about this particular thing that they've asked for. Well, that's going to be an experience, because if you've come out of a comms degree, you're not used to talking to an engineer, I can assure you of that. And, these sorts of skills, I'm not sure where else you get them unless you're really cooperating with industry and you're doing something together. That'd be my advice and what I would say.
Thanks. Thank you, Keith. And, some of the comments that you've shared, and resonate, in terms of, what preconceived assumptions mean in the digital world. And, it's very similar to what Ian was saying at the outset. And I was just reading Glenn's comments in the chat line where he says, my point is that digital technologies are mediating all skills. There is no divide between life and skills that are digital and those that are not, which is what Claire was also reflecting about the technological or hard skills versus soft skills and the interplay between the two within the digital innovation scope. Now, I know that most surveys, including World Economic Forum, including Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, as well as many other peak bodies, have identified AI as the most fundamental technology that will cause disruption across all sectors within this digital transformation domain. I might ask Jed if you can comment a little bit on that broader aspect and impact of AI, and what that might mean for the society and for us as a university. And there's been many comments in the chat line about AI with respect to our business model and so on. It's broader. And maybe Helen, from the educational point of view, because I know that you've been dwelling in that technology area and thinking about what does that mean for education. Jed?
Thanks so much, Alex. Really appreciate that. And also mindful on the call, we probably have people from your Centre of Excellence in Automated Decision Making and elsewhere. So you've got some fantastic in-house talent. I suppose in my space, we think about those questions through a regulatory lens as well, which your university is doing too. So it's not just the opportunity of AI itself and adoption. We can think about practical example in financial services and healthcare. There has been a dollar value put to that by Data 61, which is $315 billion as the economic opportunity. I suppose the caveat I would put around that, and I'm always much more careful about drawing on those big macro figures too, is that is dependent on a range of things. So it's dependent on how we sit in a supply chain. It's dependent on commercialization. And it's dependent on whether we get regulatory settings right, including our participation in standards. So the pieces of work we're doing is actually around connecting some of the work that's happening on the ground, the people who have a vested stake, and many of them in this call too, the big tech companies, academic experts as well in different domains, and not just those hard tech areas. I mean, you'll be relieved to know we have people from law participating, which is, I think, we can all breathe a sigh of relief too. And some of those other social science disciplines. So actually working together to shape a regulatory framework for Australia, but one that is global in ambition. There is a danger that when we go down the track, as I said before, of just thinking of Australia in isolation and what we can do in our own echo chamber, that's actually not how we will scale. And historically, if you look at what has come out of Australia, if you talk about Google Maps, if you talk about Wi-Fi, if you talk about all of these products, which are actually living, breathing examples, that's exactly where we want to get with AI. And I think we have to play to our strengths. So Alex, to your question, we have to also then call out what are the areas where we already have a competitive advantage. We might think about health, we might think about fintech and regtech as being particular areas, and others we might let glide, to use that terminology. So I think getting all these settings right is important. It takes both skill sets. And I was going to say some of the work I do is also an example of getting those soft skills, and sometimes they're not even soft skills, it's hard-nosed negotiation, but it comes from a social science background and a regulatory policy. So I would encourage everyone on the call, we've been talking about those models of how we train people. It's scary. I get into discussions with decision makers who want to regulate people like Ian's company at scale. And then we start with what is a standard? Oh, do you have examples of regulation that works? So there's a real opportunity there for universities to play, not in a bland way, but a thought leadership role in actually meaty ways of looking at all these questions, so that we not just build the products in the space you're all working in, including in partnership, but we actually think about the regulatory settings, and we play to our strengths as the middle power we are, and not just as an island.
Thank you, Jed. Over to you, Helen.
Yeah, I guess some of these terms, they sort of sound like it's a new approach, but really digital companies have always been driven by data. You can measure in a digital experience, you measure every engagement. You are actually gathering that data. The key thing is to use it, and to use it as a feedback loop to your experiences you're delivering. And AI obviously accelerates your ability to do that. So for example, people have been asking what are examples of linking that big data to the experience, and we've got examples every day in how we're delivering anything from profiling our students on their demographic data, on their previous education prior to joining us, and also on some surveys where we get more nuanced views from them on their level of confidence and things. We've got a personalized learning profile now, which sends those students down personalized learning journeys. Some who are less confident with less experience of learning get more support from success coaches and teachers. Likewise, our teachers, every interaction of our teachers is measured in a digital environment. It's face-to-face, but we can still, you can get all of the messaging can have AI run over it for sentiment analysis, for keywords, for things like empathy, which we know are really important from a teacher, etc. So we can be analyzing every single piece of the student experience in data, and then we can be optimizing those experiences, and we're just getting better all the time as that becomes algorithmic rather than human intervention, analyzing a report on a teacher, for example, and responding. That can become more and more intelligent as we go forward. But that is actually business as usual digital experiences, and I think that's really exciting for blended learning in the uni, that all of the pieces, and so much is now partly online, should be measured and should be used to optimize your student journey. And I guess it's sort of not new news. I think we sort of make it sound harder when we say big data and personalized learning, or I love precision learning, but it's actually happening now, and we just get better and better and more precise with the intelligence we apply.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for reflecting on some of the comments in the chat line around personalized learning and precision learning, some of the new themes that have emerged through the conversation among our colleagues. Claire Mason, from your participation and in our co-chairing on the National Digital Skills Expert Panel, you really looked at deeply in terms of, how can we develop digital skills and associated skills required for digital transformation at scale? What is required to do that at scale? And how can a dual sector university and global dual sector universities such as RMIT, play or take an even more profound role across the sector in this area? What are your personal views, Claire, about that?
That's a big question. I mean, I'm so impressed by the quality of the discussion today, and I think Helen's provided such excellent examples of how this can be done. I think there are plenty of educational institutions, though, that are not yet doing this, whose idea of online learning is to put PowerPoint slides on a website and allow students to download them. So I think getting more educational institutions to move into the kind of space that we're describing and talking about today would make a big difference. And some of that is about building the capability of the educators and the investment we make in innovation for the sector. I think an interesting piece that came out of the work that we did on that panel, Alex, was the idea that building digital skills is not an essential capability for training to become an educator in Australia. And yet it's an essential skill in every occupation we've been talking about. And the other piece is that education is our third biggest export in Australia, and yet we're not investing in CRCs and centres of excellence in the delivery of education and training. And sure, universities have their own research capability, but I don't think it's been looked at for the larger education sector, and that could be really interesting.
That's a really good point, Claire, because we do lack, I think, mechanisms, vehicles to partner industry consortia on scale with university consortia like we do in research. And I think that may be one of those takeaway recommendations that require much more significant effort and funding to actually achieve that. There was a really, really important question or comment in the chat line around partnering and ways of partnering to achieve or co-create, more agile delivery between institutions such as RMIT and industry, because we've heard so many times that partnership is important. Seeing the concept of, in the chat line, and Ian mentioned that around earn and learn, which is really, taking that internships and placements and working and studying to another level. How do we do that at scale? And how do we do that at scale in an agile manner while achieving that agile response and agility in partnering? Any ideas around that? I'll start with you, Ian, because you've started that discussion, and then we'll move on.
I feel accountable, but I'm glad this is a shared problem amongst friends. So that's is that old saying, if you share a worry, you halve it. So I'm feeling okay with that. So here's just to continue with the agent de provocateur. Dear Helen, imagine if we could collaborate where all of our Australian employees had a subscription to RMIT Online. And we actually committed, let's say, $2,000 per person, and RMIT Online had a fixed funding mechanism per year per person. It would increase as we hired more people. And the only thing we'd ask for in return was each quarter, can we share with you the skills where we're short? And can you help us scale our workforce to plug the gap of those skills? Alex, without being cute, I think it starts with that conversation. We have a particular need. We have an internal SOAK and investment process for training. If I highlight that and share that with my industry partners, how do we jointly solve the problem? And the reason I start with subscription revenue is just to disrupt people. But the second thing is, we might agree that over the course of that subscription model, Amazon gets 4 skills. You decide what level of capability those skills are at, or whether they're an under certificate or just a course unit that might build into something in the future. It still applies based on standards. But the ability for every 90 days for us to say, here's our problem statement, here's our plan to fix it. It could start with something as simple as that, Alex, with making it not too programmatic and architectural.
When are you free, Ian?
This is the soft close. I'm chatting to you. I'm going to email you right now, Helen. We're going to make this happen.
There we go. There we go. And this is recorded, Ian, so we'll get back and just close the loop.
Exactly.
Keith, any comments from industry perspective on that partnering? I know you've seen in Germany, it comes natural. Industry sees that as a core business, partnering with university, getting students to do internships and moving, to a different level, even building factories and building headquarters on campuses rather than technology parks and so on. Any observations there from your perspective? How can we build partnerships at scale and maybe drive that earn and learn approach and other ideas we've seen coming through the chat line?
I think that the AWSs of the world and the Siemens of the world, the larger corporations, we are like-minded, and we're thinking about this stuff all the time, and we're really looking to the future. The amount of MOUs I've written in the last 10 years, I can't even count, including with RMIT and so on, including between Germany and Australia. But I think the biggest challenge for Australia is the small companies, the small businesses, which is the majority of our businesses. One thing is that they don't know what they don't know. So you don't know that there's an opportunity unless someone comes and says there's an opportunity, or unless you've got time to think about that. And generally they don't have time to think about it because they're very small. I mean, the general manager might also be the person responsible for recruiting, HR, you name it, a whole bunch of different things. How do you engage with those companies at scale? That's what universities need to be able to do. And I guess the idea of the test labs is one there, but even once the test labs are built, how do you engage with that broader group at scale? How do you bring them in? We've got, as you know, we're the largest industrial software company in the world, and we've got all this great high-tech software that people are using, and when they use it, it's amazing. I can list off dozens of companies that are using our stuff, and they are doing really well. Helimods in the Sunshine Coast modify helicopters. They've developed the one-touch stretcher system that's being sold around the world that's saving lives. It's taking time off how long it takes to get someone onto a search and rescue helicopter and to emergency critical care. This stuff was developed here. They developed a digital twin. They've invested in this stuff from the beginning, but that's their mindset. How do you get all of the other businesses to start to see that, to look at what they're doing today and moving even just a step further towards digitalization, to automation, to robots, to those sorts of things, because most of them are probably at Industry 2.0. That's the challenge from my point of view.
Thank you, Keith. And I realize that time is running out. I think almost 1.5 hours have passed in a twist of a moment. So I might just now start wrapping up by giving all of our members of panel an opportunity to maybe provide a last insight, last comment, parting shot, so to say. I'll start with you.
I think I'd just reiterate the comment that I made online, which is that it's about reducing the silos. One of our future work trends is porous boundaries, that we no longer have the same clear distinctions between who works in a given organization and who's in a given sector. And I think the more that we can break down those boundaries in the educational system as well, so that, you know, we have industry acting as educators, we have educators acting as problem solvers in industry, students as workers, the more we're getting closer to the kind of educational system we need.
Thank you, Claire. Helen, over to you. Last comment.
Yeah, we chose the word community very thoughtfully in our mission because we felt it would take a village to solve the Great Australian Skills Crisis, and that village has to include industry. And look, a thank you to all the industry partners contributing to our strategy, which is exactly what this needs to look like, isn't it? We contribute to each other's strategies and we solve problems as we go on our strategic agenda. Thanks for the journey so far, and very excited what the next 5 years means for us all.
Fantastic, Helen. Jed?
Thanks, Alex. It's a classic mute scenario. +1 from me, more investment and more agile training. And I think we've got a few templates out of today's discussion for a way to do that. And then finally, thinking about product and service life cycles too. So maybe a bit outside of the bounds of the discussion we've had. But if we want to punch globally above our weight, we have to do it now.
Thank you, Jed. Keith, any last comment?
Yeah, look, I would just say that we have a tendency to treat traditional blue-collar workforces in a certain way, and companies get support to employ them and so on and so forth, and we need to treat these new skills in the same way as being able to pick up a hammer and use a piece of wood and cut it. It's the same thing, and it needs government support, and then you will get smaller businesses taking that first step and that risk. At the moment, the risk is all on them.
Digital is great leveler, absolutely. Thanks, Keith. Over to you, Ian, to close off the panel discussion.
I feel the weight of responsibility, Alex. I just wrote down some notes, and I look at this as, you know, what can we do together on Monday? And I think about, let's eliminate constraints, experiment together, and fail really fast. Because I think it's just a case of figuring this out. And I think about these times where perfection may be the enemy of good. And so some strong experimentation might be in order, and we're here to help.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you to the whole panel. I'd really like to thank all of you. Wonderful group of people. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation and the insights we shared. This is by no means, you know, a means to an end. This is the beginning of a conversation leading to our new RMIT Next Strategy 2025. After well-deserved rest during the summer holidays, after this very, very difficult year, we will reconvene. Tom Bentley and his team are planning a number of round tables to unfold further what this all means coming out of our panel conversations, such as the one we had today, focusing on digital transformation. I wish to thank you all, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Panel members.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Everyone.